They tried every trick in the book to force me off. My family ranch, the ranch my grandfather built with his bare hands. 70 years ago one day, I received a notice from an HOA. I had never signed up for demanding $15,000 in fines for aesthetic violations and decreasing neighborhood property values. Their plan was to bankrupt me so a development corporation could build a luxury resort on my family's land. They picked the wrong target because when a former Green Beret gets backed into a corner, he fights back smart and merciless. What state are you watching from? Drop a comment below because these land grabbers might be targeting your neighborhood next. The Morgan Ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. 200 acres of fertile land straddling the Texas-New Mexico border. My grandfather purchased it after returning from World War II, transforming barren scrubland into a thriving cattle operation through sheer determination. I grew up watching my father continue that legacy, learning the value of hard work and the deep connection to the land that sustains us. When Dad passed away 5 years ago, I left my Special Forces career to come home and take over the transition from military tactics to agricultural management. Wasn't always smooth, but the ranch was finally turning a consistent profit again. That's when the vultures started circling. The rural landscape around us had been changing dramatically over the past decade. What was once miles of working farmland had gradually transformed into upscale housing developments and golf courses catering to wealthy retirees and vacation homeowners. Golden Horizon Development Corporation had purchased several neighboring properties, building what they called luxury countryside living, with home prices starting at $1 million. They had approached me multiple times with offers for my land, each one higher than the last, but I had no intention of selling the Morgan legacy. The ranch wasn't just property, it was my family's history etched into every fence post and cattle pen. On a sweltering Tuesday in June, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up my dusty driveway. A woman in an immaculate business suit stepped out, somehow managing to look perfectly composed despite the 100-degree Texas heat. "Mr. Morgan, I'm Vivian Grant, president of the Evergreen Valley Homeowners Association. We need to discuss some compliance issues with your property," she announced, with practiced authority, extending a leather portfolio filled with official-looking documents. I invited her inside, more out of curiosity than hospitality. My property wasn't part of any development, let alone an HOA. As we sat at my kitchen table, she explained that my ranch had recently been incorporated into the Evergreen Valley community boundaries, and I was now subject to their regulations. According to her paperwork, I had accumulated $15,000 in fines for various violations: unauthorized structures, improper maintenance, livestock limitation, and other ridiculous claims. "This is absurd," I told her firmly. "I never agreed to join any HOA. This land has been independent for 3 generations." Vivian's smile never reached her eyes as she explained that the incorporation was completely legal according to county rezoning. When I demanded to see the documentation proving my property was included, she promised to send it over, but her tone carried a clear threat. "The fines increase by $500 each week. They remain unpaid, Mr. Morgan. There could be serious consequences for continued non-compliance." After she left, my neighbor, Peter Wilson, who'd lived adjacent to our ranch for over 40 years, stopped by when I mentioned the visit. His weathered face darkened. "Hank, there isn't any HOA out here. Never has been. Something fish is going on." The next day, I drove to the county records office and discovered Golden Horizon had indeed registered a new HOA 6 months earlier, mysteriously drawing boundaries that somehow encompassed my ranch despite having no legal right to do so. I immediately called my sister, Sarah, a corporate attorney in Austin. "They're pulling a scam, Hank," she confirmed after reviewing the documents I sent. "But fighting it could take months or even years in court. Golden Horizon has deep pockets and an army of lawyers. They're counting on you not having the resources for a prolonged legal battle." That night, while checking the perimeter fences, I discovered a small device attached to my gatepost, a wireless surveillance camera. Someone was monitoring my every move. Looking up into the night sky, I spotted a small drone hovering in the distance, its lights blinking in the darkness of the Texas night. And that's when the switch flipped. They weren't just pushing legal boundaries anymore. They were trespassing, violating privacy laws, and waging a psychological war on my home. I took the camera down, carefully placed it in a lead-lined ammunition box, and drove it out to an old barn we hadn't used in years. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one, but it wouldn't be on their terms. I wasn't just some rancher with a stubborn streak. I was a tactician trained in counter-surveillance infiltration and tactical deception. They had no idea who they'd picked to fight with. The land taught me patience, the military taught me precision, and the Morgan name it taught me never to back down from a bully the next weeks. Brought an escalating campaign of harassment. My water service was suddenly cut off for pipe inspection, forcing me to rely on an old well I discovered my name had mysteriously appeared on a credit default list at the local bank, preventing suppliers from selling me agricultural equipment. A woman named Amanda to Reed, who I later learned was Reynolds' assistant, personally visited my regular customers presenting fake legal documents claiming my products didn't meet safety standards every time I drove into town. Officer Trent Jenkins would pull me over for minor traffic violations, even issuing a citation for overloaded cargo when I was hauling just a small amount of feed. One morning, I discovered someone had sprayed herbicide on a portion of my pasture during the night, killing the grass and forcing me to quarantine a section of my herd. The campaign took its toll. Feed suppliers refused my business equipment repairs, were mysteriously delayed my cattle. Brokers suddenly found problems with paperwork that had been acceptable. For years, I was being systematically isolated through it all. I kept meticulous records of every incident, installed security cameras across the property. Used my military training to harden the ranch against intruders. Local reporter Elena Rodriguez approached me one afternoon explaining she was investigating Golden Horizon's business practices. "You're not the first, Mr. Morgan," she revealed. "They've used these tactics to force out landowners in 2 other counties, but the victims were either too intimidated or paid off to speak publicly." That night, my hay barn mysteriously caught fire. The sheriff's department conducted a cursory investigation, concluding it was probably electrical issues. Despite the barn having no power lines, that was the final straw. Watching the blackened remains of the barn smoldering under the moonlight, I felt something settle in my chest. Not fear, not even anger, but clarity. They weren't just trying to pressure me, they were trying to erase me, and I had no intention of letting that happen. Quietly, 2 days after the fire, I received a strange package. Inside was no letter, just a small book about bankruptcy, a step-by-step guide, and a photograph of my sister's house in Austin. The message was crystal clear. They weren't just targeting me, but my family too. That's when I decided to stop playing defense. It was time to fight back with everything I had. I wouldn't just protect my land. I would make Golden Horizon regret the day they ever set eyes on Morgan Ranch. But I knew revenge without strategy was just noise, so I went silent. I stopped calling suppliers, stopped filing complaints, stopped reacting, let them think. I was folding. I buried decoy surveillance cameras in plain sight and moved the real ones to discreet angles. I set up false patterns with my cattle, rotations, and deliberately left my broken tractor parked in view so they'd assume the ranch was falling apart. I even started attending HOA meetings again, quietly, anonymously, wearing a baseball cap and sitting in the back row. I took notes, observed who talked to whom, which motions were pushed through without discussion, and who voted which way. Every detail went into my ledger. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I worked with Elena. We dug deep into land deed records, water rights, political donation logs, even FAA drone regulations. Turns out, Golden Horizon had a web of shell companies tied to PACs, funding local zoning board elections. Their so-called HOA enforcement officers weren't even licensed investigators, just hired private security with fake credentials. Elena found a whistleblower, too, an ex-contractor, who'd helped install illegal utility lines across private properties without consent. We started recording interviews, storing backups off-site, and lining up community members who had quietly endured the same bullying tactics. By the time they realized I'd gone quiet, it was already too late. The noose was tightening, and this time it was around their necks. I also reconnected with some old military contacts, 2 of whom now worked cybersecurity in the private sector. They helped me trace the surveillance equipment back to a subcontractor Golden Horizon had used in Nevada, one that had previously been investigated for invasion of privacy. We were building a case not just to expose them, but to drag them through every level of court they thought they could manipulate. And then I set the trap. I mailed a fake letter. One. They couldn't resist it. Suggested I was preparing to sell the ranch to an oil company interested in drilling. The bait worked faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, a local councilman, who'd never returned my calls, was suddenly knocking on my door. I saw the panic in his eyes. He wasn't just curious. He was desperate the next day. Drones buzzed my property at low altitude by that evening. Two black SUVs idled across the road, just watching. They had taken the bait, but I wasn't selling anything. I was detonating a bomb, paperwork proof and public records that would soon bury every corrupt executive behind. Golden Horizon Elena had already scheduled an exclusive segment on the local news. Our whistleblower had agreed to go on camera, and I had one more ace up my sleeve. An open letter to the state attorney general, co-signed by 14 landowners and backed by video evidence, and I was just getting started. The following week, the mastermind himself finally decided to make an appearance. Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Golden Horizon, arrived in a vehicle that cost more than most people's homes. His two bodyguards, ex-military by their bearing, positioned themselves strategically as Reynolds approached my front porch with the confident swagger of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Mr. Morgan?" he called out with a practiced smile. "I think it's time we had a direct conversation." Maria Valdez, who had worked for my family since I was a child, watched wearily from the kitchen window as I invited him. And I noticed him surveying my modest home with barely disguised contempt, taking in the worn furniture and family photos with the calculated gaze of someone assessing assets. We sat in silence for a moment, then he leaned forward. "You've made quite a mess," he said smoothly, as if commenting on spilled coffee. "Rather than corporate misconduct, but we can clean it up. Quietly name your price." I didn't flinch. I just smiled. "I already did," I said, sliding a folder across the table, copies of the whistleblower, testimony, zoning fraud evidence, and a list of the fake licenses. Their security team carried his face, hardened, the smugness evaporating as he flipped through the first few pages. His fingers hesitated ever so slightly, just enough to let me know he understood. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a reckoning. I'm not here to negotiate. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm here to watch." "You sweat, let's cut to the chase," Reynolds said, settling into my father's old armchair without waiting for an invitation. "I'm prepared to offer you $2 million for this property, double market value. You can relocate anywhere you want. Start fresh. Without all these," he gestured vaguely at the ranch beyond. The window's complications when I declined without hesitation. His demeanor shifted from charm to intimidation. "You should understand your situation clearly, Morgan. Golden Horizon has relationships with every bank, judge, and regulatory agency in this region. The HOA fines are just the beginning. We can make it impossible for you to operate this ranch, and eventually you'll be forced into bankruptcy. You'll lose the land anyway, but without a penny to show for it." Throughout his monologue, I maintained a neutral expression, but my mind was racing. The special forces had taught me to recognize when I was in the information-gathering phase of an operation. Reynolds grew more animated as he described the planned evergreen resort, a $500 million resort development, with golf courses and luxury villas. In his enthusiasm, he revealed the true reason my land was so valuable. It controlled both the water access and the only suitable entrance point for their grand project. "This is happening with or without your cooperation, Morgan," he concluded, standing to leave. "You have 1 week to accept the offer. After that, things get extremely unpleasant." What Reynolds didn't know was that I had activated the ranch's new security system before his arrival, recording every word of his threats and promises. After showing Reynolds out, I swept the living room and discovered a listening device planted under the armchair where he'd been sitting. They weren't just watching the ranch. They were monitoring conversations inside my home. I left the bug in place. Feeding false information could prove useful. Later that evening, I began researching property laws and land use regulations, looking for any leverage I could find against Golden Horizon. While searching through old property documents in my father's study, I discovered something shocking: a boundary survey from 1950, showing the original ranch boundaries. According to these documents, our property was actually 50 acres larger than what we currently use. The missing parcel, the exact spot where Golden Horizon had built their luxurious sales office. I stared at the old surveyor's map for several minutes, heart pounding. If the document held up under scrutiny, it meant Reynolds and his entire operation were squatting illegally on Morgan land. Not only would they be liable for trespassing and land theft, but every permit, zoning adjustment, and construction approval they had obtained for that office would be invalid. It was the kind of leverage that didn't just stop a development, it could collapse a multi-million-dollar empire. I made 3 calls that night. One to my sister, Sarah to initiate a quiet legal verification of the documents, one to Elena. Rodriguez, the reporter, to prepare a slow drip release if things went public, and one to a friend from the service who now worked in drone forensics, if Reynolds thought he could bulldoze his way into my life. He was about to find out what it really meant to face a Morgan on home soil over the next few days. I worked with Sarah and Emma Chen, a real estate attorney she recommended, to verify the old boundary documents were legally valid while they confirmed our claim was legitimate. Emma warned that Golden Horizon's influence with local officials meant a legal battle could drag on for years during my investigation. I accidentally intercepted a conversation through the listening device they'd planted Bradley Turner Golden. Horizon's project manager was assuring investors that the resort would break ground within 3 months, promising a 20% return on investment. They were under tremendous time pressure to secure my land. My old Special Forces teammate Rick Davidson came to visit after hearing about my troubles as we inspected the property. Boundaries. He made an observation that would change everything. You know, Hank, under Texas land use laws, you have nearly unlimited rights to operate certain recreational businesses regardless of local zoning, including, he grinned, a shooting range. The idea hit me like lightning. A gun range directly bordering their planned luxury resort would devastate property values and make their villas impossible to sell. I spent days researching noise regulations, safety requirements, and zoning laws for firing ranges, everything checked out with proper engineering and safety measures. I could legally operate a gun range on my property regardless of HOA. Elena provided another crucial piece of information. Golden Horizon had faced similar resistance in Florida but had used financial settlements and non-disclosure agreements to silence the opposition. She also uncovered that they'd already begun pre-eller lots to investors, promising completion dates that required my land. With Rick's help, I designed a shooting range specifically engineered to maximize sound impact toward Golden Horizon's development area while still complying with all safety and environmental regulations. When Sarah expressed concern about escalating the conflict, I explained this wasn't just about keeping our land anymore, it was about stopping predatory developers who use these tactics against vulnerable landowners everywhere. Work on the range began immediately. I invested a significant portion of my savings into concrete shooting platforms, BMS, target systems, and state-of-the-art safety equipment. Rick called in favors from our military network, bringing in veterans to help with construction. We worked day and night, racing against the clock the day we poured concrete for the first shooting platform. A small helicopter circled overhead through binoculars. I could see Reynolds and Bradley photographing our operation that night. My phone rang. Morgan Reynolds' voice was cold with fury. "You think you're being clever, don't you? Playing with fire will only get you burned." I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch long enough to make him uncomfortable, then said evenly, "Careful, Marcus, you're threatening a veteran on his own property. That's a federal issue." Then I hung up. The very next morning, an anonymous complaint was filed with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, claiming we were stockpiling illegal weapons. 2 agents showed up at the ranch only to find everything in strict compliance. I gave them coffee, a tour, and copies of all our documentation by the time they left. They were laughing about how someone clearly had an axe to grind. Meanwhile, Elena's report began taking shape. She was interviewing other victims of Golden Horizon's tactics, widows, farmers, and small business owners who had lost their land under similar pressure. Each story added weight to ours. I encouraged her to wait just a bit longer before going public. We were nearing our own checkmate. We hosted our soft launch of the gun range on a sunny Saturday. Dozens of veterans, ranchers, and local enthusiasts came out some driving hours just to show support. The sound of live fire echoed across the hills, just loud enough to reach the model homes Golden Horizon had set up for prospective buyers. I made sure every shot was within legal decibel limits, but psychologically it hit like a cannon blast. 2 days later, I received another letter, this time from a law firm claiming nuisance and intentional economic interference. I posted it on the range's bulletin board under the heading Trophy of the Week. By now our cause had taken on a life of its own. The community, once wary of Golden Horizon's promises, was rallying behind us. Donations poured in. Volunteers showed up with tools, equipment, even food. Retired engineers helped fine-tune the range acoustics. Local ranchers offered to provide security patrols at night, and that's when I Made my next move using the surveillance device Reynolds planted. I fed them false intel leaking plans to expand the range into a tactical training ground for private security contractors. It wasn't true yet, but the rumor was enough. Within 48 hours, Golden Horizon's lead investors began pulling out. Elena confirmed that one of the hedge funds backing the project had frozen its assets. They couldn't risk buying into a resort next to a tactical shooting facility run by ex-military. Reynolds tried to call again. I didn't answer. I was done talking. The next morning, Sheriff Mitchell arrived with a convoy of vehicles, including Vivian Grant and a building inspector. Mitchell waved a stop work order claiming we were violating at least 7 building codes. I calmly presented our complete paperwork, building permits, approved plans, safety certifications, all properly filed and authorized through a neighboring county office where Golden Horizon didn't have influence. Emma appeared at my side professionally, explaining that while Golden Horizon might control local officials in our immediate area, their reach didn't extend to the entire region. The building Inspector Stan Tucker reluctantly confirmed our permits were valid, leaving Mitchell and Vivian floundering for another angle of attack. Vivian threatened HOA violations. Emma presented our lawsuit challenging the fraudulent HOA boundaries. Mitchell tried citing noise ordinances. I demonstrated how our range design complied with all acoustic regulations. Elena and other reporters appeared, turning the confrontation into a media spectacle as the debate grew heated. Commissioner Jack Harper unexpectedly arrived, publicly supporting my right to use my property as I saw fit. I've been watching Golden Horizon's tactics for months, he announced. For the cameras, they offered me a generous consultation fee to look the other way. I refused. Now we're investigating their permit applications and finding numerous irregularities with their legal options. Exhausted, Mitchell and Vivian were forced to retreat. Construction continued at a rapid pace, and within weeks, the Freedom Range was nearly complete. Golden Horizon began receiving cancellations from customers who'd put down deposits on properties near what would now be an active shooting facility. Judge Walter Simmons scheduled an emergency hearing on Golden Horizon's request for an injunction, but Elena's discovery and publication of emails between Reynolds and Simmons showing their close relationship forced the judge to recuse himself. A video I posted on Reddit titled "Former Green Beret Fights Fake HOA" went viral, attracting national attention to our fight. The night before the range's grand opening, I received an anonymous email with attached surveillance footage from Golden Horizon's offices. The video showed Reynolds instructing what appeared to be mercenaries. I don't care how you do it as long as that shooting range doesn't open tomorrow. And if Morgan has an accident in the process, well, that's the risk he took playing this dangerous game. I immediately contacted Agent Ramirez, an FBI investigator Elena had introduced me to, forwarding the video evidence together. We prepared for whatever might come next. The FBI acted fast by dawn. They had deployed undercover agents across the ranch and set up a mobile surveillance unit disguised as a cattle trailer. My property was more secure than ever, and I quietly informed my veteran crew what was going on. No one flinched. We were ready that evening. A black SUV without plates was spotted parked on the road just beyond our western pasture. Rick and 2 others took up observation points nearby while I remained close to the main house with Maria and Emma around. Midnight motion sensors triggered near the maintenance shed. Rick and the team moved in swiftly, pinning down 2 individuals dressed in tactical gear attempting to plant an incendiary device under a fuel tank. The FBI intervened moments later, arresting the men without incident. The press release the next morning was thunderous: attempted arson foiled at veteran-owned ranch, suspects tied to luxury developer. The suspects, under pressure and facing serious federal charges, quickly began to talk. Their phones, seized on the spot, contained messages, payment records, and direct links to Reynolds and Bradley Turner. The case exploded nationally. Elena's report was picked up by major networks, and Golden Horizon stock plummeted overnight. Reynolds went into hiding. The FBI raided Golden Horizon's regional headquarters computer servers, and hard drives were confiscated. Whistleblowers came forward. A former accountant revealed systematic fraud in the company's zoning permit applications. A project coordinator admitted to forging utility access documents. Emma filed an injunction freezing all Golden Horizon development projects across the state pending investigation at the Freedom Rang's grand opening, We held a memorial ceremony for landowners across the country who had lost their homes to similar coercive tactics. Veterans, ranchers, and families from as far as Wyoming came to stand in solidarity. Rick gave a short but powerful speech. They thought they could isolate us, but they forgot. We're not just neighbors, we're a community, and when you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. I stood at the center of the firing line that afternoon, holding the first round of ceremonial shots. My daughter handed me the brass casing engraved with our family crest. I took a deep breath, looked across the land my grandfather fought to preserve, and fired. The shot echoed through the valley, loud, legal, and impossible to ignore. Golden Horizon had come to conquer, but we were still standing, and we weren't going anywhere. The grand opening of freedom. Range exceeded all expectations. Hundreds of supporters from surrounding counties arrived, many bringing their firearms for the inaugural shooting session. Local and regional media covered the event, particularly drawn to our provocative sign built with grit, defended with lead. The range featured state-of-the-art target systems, competitions for various skill levels, and discounts for veterans and law enforcement from the highest shooting platform. Visitors could clearly see the Golden Horizon sales office and development area throughout the day. I noticed potential buyers touring the development suddenly losing interest when the sound of gunfire echoed across the property line. That night, security cameras captured a team of armed men attempting to infiltrate the range. Thanks to our preparations and the veterans I'd stationed around the property, we were ready using military-grade night vision equipment. We documented everything as the intruders attempted to plant incendiary devices near the main building. When confronted, they fled, but not before our cameras captured clear images of their faces and vehicle license plates. The FBI moved quickly, arresting 2 of the men at a local motel. Under interrogation, they implicated Reynolds, directly confirming he had hired them to destroy the range and intimidate me into selling. The next morning, Elena broke the story across all major news outlets. Developer CEO implicated in murder-for-hire plot against local rancher Golden. Horizon's stock plummeted as investors panicked. Reynolds, desperate to contain the damage, called an emergency meeting with his co-conspirators, including Sheriff Mitchell and Vivian. What they didn't know was that the FBI had been monitoring their communications for weeks, gathering evidence of conspiracy, attempted arson, fraud, and numerous other felonies. That evening, Reynolds, Mitchell, and Vivian arrived at the range in a last-ditch effort to threaten or bribe me into silence, unaware they were walking into a carefully orchestrated sting operation. As they approached the main building, Reynolds was in full meltdown. "This ends tonight, Morgan," he shouted, pointing a finger at my chest. "I've invested too much to let some stubborn rancher destroy everything one way or another. You're done." Mitchell stood uncomfortably at his side, his hand hovering near his service weapon. Unknown to them, FBI agents were positioned around the property, recording every word and gesture when Reynolds made the fatal mistake of explicitly threatening to burn down the range himself if necessary. Agent Ramirez gave the signal. Federal agents emerged from concealment, arresting all 3 while reading them their rights. The look of shocked disbelief on Reynolds' face as he was handcuffed was something I'll never forget. "This isn't over," Reynolds hissed as they led him away. "I still have friends with power. I'll never forget this." I just smiled in response, because what Reynolds didn't know was that I had prepared one final surprise that would ensure he'd never harass anyone again. The FBI's investigation had expanded far beyond our local conflict, uncovering evidence that Golden Horizon had perpetrated similar schemes in multiple states, amassing millions through fraud, intimidation, and bribery. The company's assets were frozen, and dozens of executives and officials were implicated in what the media called one of the largest development fraud conspiracies in decades. 1 week later, the U.S. Attorney's Office announced formal charges against Marcus Reynolds and 14 other high-ranking officials, including Sheriff Mitchell and Vivian. The indictments included racketeering, conspiracy to commit arson, attempted bribery of public officials, and violations of federal property and civil rights laws. Headlines read, "Fake HOA Empire Crumbles, Veteran Rancher Sparks National Reckoning." But the true reward wasn't in headlines. It was in the faces of my neighbors. Former victims from other counties began contacting us, emboldened by our stand. Many had believed they were alone, powerless, against the machinery of greed now. They had a blueprint and a voice. Elena launched a documentary series titled Land Taken, with the first episode focused on Morgan Ranch. Donations poured into a legal fund to help rural families defend their land. Rick and the other vets who helped build the range stayed on forming, a nonprofit that offered free legal consultation and tactical support for property owners under similar threat. The Freedom Range became more than a business. It became a symbol. I stood one evening at the edge of the property, watching the sun dip behind the hills, rifles slung over my shoulder boots dusty from the day's work. Sophia walked up behind me, placing her hand gently on my arm. "They're not coming back, are they?" she asked. "No," I said, watching the last rays of light glint off the windmill near the barn. "But even if they do, we're ready." In the distance, I could hear the sound of targets pinging as a group of teenagers practiced under the guidance of a retired Marine instructor. The place buzzed with life, laughter, grit, pride. We had turned our stand into something bigger than ourselves, and somewhere in a federal holding facility, Marcus Reynolds had finally learned what happens when you bet everything against a man who refuses to be moved. The story of Morgan Ranch and our stand against corruption spread far beyond our county lines. Within a month of Reynolds' conviction, I began receiving emails and calls from property owners across the country facing similar situations. Families in Florida, Arizona, and Colorado shared stories of fake HOA. It was clear that what happened here wasn't isolated. It was a nationwide pattern targeting rural landowners sitting on valuable property. I'll never forget one particular Saturday morning when an elderly couple drove all the way from Oklahoma to visit the range. Harold and Margie Williams, both in their 70s, had lost their family farm to tactics eerily similar to what Golden Horizon had attempted with me. "We just wanted to see the place where someone finally fought back and won," Harold told me, his voice breaking as Margie squeezed his hand. They had been forced into bankruptcy after a sudden reshoning and fabricated environmental violations tactics that Reynolds prosecutors now recognized as part of a larger blueprint used by corrupt developers. That meeting changed something fundamental in me. While I had been focused on protecting my family's legacy, I began to see a bigger purpose emerging from our victory. With Emma's legal expertise and Elena's investigative skills, we established the Rural Property Rights Alliance, a network connecting threatened landowners with legal resources, media contacts, and strategic support. Sarah helped coordinate pro-no legal assistance from her firm for particularly vulnerable cases. The alliance wasn't just about fighting back. It was about preventing these situations by educating property owners before predators like Reynolds could sink their teeth in. Commissioner Harper proved to be a powerful ally in reforming county regulations. Together, we drafted new transparency requirements for HOA formations and boundary changes, ensuring property owners received clear notification and the right to opt out of forced inclusions. What happened to Morgan Ranch exposed a gap in our legal system, Harper explained during a town hall meeting. These reforms ensure that gap can't be exploited again, at least not in our county. The Harper-Morgan Transparency Act became a model that neighboring counties soon adopted. 1 week after Reynolds' arrest, I received a call from the county office. According to the court's determination, not only was the 50 acres of encroached land being returned to Morgan Ranch, but the entire Evergreen Reserve project had been canceled. As I considered what to do with the newly reclaimed land, a bold idea took shape. If there couldn't be a luxury resort, why not create something meaningful for the community? Instead, we broke ground 2 months later on the Liberty Grounds Training Center, a nonprofit veteran outdoor education and survival training complex. It would feature courses in marksmanship, wilderness survival, agriculture, and first aid, all led by experienced veterans and ranchers. Local schools began arranging field trips before we even finished building. Parents, educators, and even small business owners volunteered to help. Elena did a feature story on the initiative, calling it From Fire to Foundation: How One Rancher Turned Resistance into Renewal. Rick stayed on permanently as director of training. Maria organized weekend cooking classes using ranch-grown ingredients, and Sophia, ever the heart of our family, transformed one of the old barns into a community art space where kids painted murals that blended Western heritage with bold, hopeful colors. The centerpiece, a towering image of a rancher planting a flag on scorched earth. Beneath it, the words, "We don't just rebuild, we repeat." One afternoon in early spring, just as the bluebonnets began to bloom, across the reclaimed acres, a convoy of cars rolled into the ranch. It was a group of families from Colorado who had recently won their own court battle. Thanks to help from the Alliance, one of them, a young mother named Danielle, hugged me as tears streamed down her face. "You don't know what you started," she said. "You gave people like us the courage to fight you." Reminded us we're not alone that night as the campfire crackled and laughter echoed from the bunkhouse. I stood looking out across the fields. The land was the same, but it felt different, stronger, more rooted in something collective, something sacred. My daughter, now a teenager, walked up beside me and slipped her arm through mine. "Dad," she said softly, "do you think Grandpa would be proud?" I smiled, thinking of my father, my grandfather, every hand that had built this place long before me. I think I said he'd be proud of all of us, and in the cool Texas wind with the stars bright above Morgan Ranch, I knew. The fight was never just about land, it was about legacy, about truth, and about never letting anyone ever again take what generations had bled to protect. Chapter 8. Legacy and Victory. The following year brought profound changes to Morgan Ranch, and the surrounding community. Reynolds was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Viven and Mitchell received shorter sentences, but substantial fines. The FBI's expanded investigation revealed Golden Horizon had used similar tactics in multiple states, leading to a class action lawsuit by dozens of victimized landowners. The 50 acres, reclaimed from Golden Horizon, were officially reintegrated into Morgan Ranch, expanding our operations significantly. The transformation of the reclaimed 50 acres took shape more beautifully than I had imagined. Rather than building more shooting ranges, we dedicated 20 acres to a wildlife conservation area focusing on native Texas species threatened by rapid development. The remaining 30 acres became the Founders Farm, a community agricultural project where local schools brought students to learn about sustainable farming practices. My grandfather would have approved of both. The education center we built there displayed historical photos of the region before development, preserving a visual record of our agricultural heritage that was rapidly disappearing elsewhere. Freedom Range became a thriving business, attracting customers from multiple states. I redesigned the main entrance, adding a new sign that became something of a tourist attraction. Freedom Range No HOA allowed veterans from across the country visited, regularly finding camaraderie and a sense of peace that many had struggled to find since leaving service. Recognizing this need, I dedicated a portion of the ranch to create the Morgan Veterans Preserve, where former service members could shoot for free, learn agricultural skills, or simply find a safe space among those who understood their experiences. The weekly Junior Rangers program became the Rangers' most popular feature, teaching local children about survival skills, responsible firearm handling, and respect for the land. These classes filled a void in rural education that schools couldn't provide, connecting young people to their heritage and environment in meaningful ways. Elena received offers from major news networks following her Golden Horizon investigation, but chose to stay with local media, focusing on uncovering similar abuses of power throughout Texas and New Mexico. Rick became a business partner, helping manage the range and preserve while developing specialized training programs for law enforcement. Freedom Range itself evolved from a tactical response into something meaningful for the community. Beyond the Junior Rangers program, we partnered with the local community college to offer certification courses in range safety management, creating new job opportunities for residents. The veteran section expanded to include therapeutic programs for those dealing with PTSD, staffed by volunteer counselors and fellow veterans who understood that sometimes healing happens best while engaging in focused activities outdoors. These programs attracted grants and recognition from veterans organizations. Nationwide, not everything was smooth sailing, of course. Golden Horizon's collapse left half-completed developments and economic ripples throughout the region. Construction workers and contractors who had been counting on the Evergreen Reserve project suddenly found themselves without expected income. Rather than celebrate their hardship, I worked with Commissioner Harper to connect these skilled workers with legitimate development projects in neighboring counties. Honest work is honest work, I told Peter, when he questioned why I'd help anyone associated with Golden Horizon. Most of these folks were just trying to make a living. They weren't part of the corruption. The legal aftermath continued for years while Reynolds Mitchell and their inner circle faced criminal charges. Dozens of civil suits emerged from the wreckage of Golden Horizon's schemes. The company's investors, many of whom claimed ignorance of the illegal tactics, fought viciously among themselves for remaining assets. Bradley Turner, the project manager who had seemed so confident about the resort's timeline, turned state's evidence in exchange for reduced charges, providing prosecutors with detailed records of bribes and threats spanning 5 years and 3 states. On the 1-year anniversary of Reynolds' arrest, we hosted a Freedom Day celebration at the ranch, attended by hundreds of supporters, officials, and media representatives. Standing on the main shooting platform overlooking the land my grandfather had claimed and my father had nurtured, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and responsibility. The legal battle had drained my savings and aged me in ways the military never had, but the ranch stood intact, our family legacy preserved for another generation. The day after the celebration, I received a letter from a high school student in Utah. It read, "Dear Mr. Morgan, our class watched a documentary about your fight against the fake. You inspired me to look into my grandfather's farm and help him review the paperwork. We discovered a shady contract now hangs in my study, framed in cedar, right next to my grandfather's original deed. We were invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee later that year about landowner rights and fraudulent. I brought Emma, Elena, and Rick with me, each of them representing a different pillar of the fight we waged. Law, truth, and defense. We weren't polished politicians or lobbyists. We just told the truth, and sometimes that's enough." The Harper-Morgan Act, modeled after our county reforms, passed in 3 more states within the next 18 months. The Rural Property Rights Alliance, which began as a handful of volunteers, now operates with regional offices and a hotline that gets over 500 calls a month. And as for the ranch, well, it keeps growing, not just in size, but in purpose. Each fall, we host a Founders Harvest Festival on the old Golden Horizon site. Kids climb hay bales, where a luxury resort was supposed to stand. Families roast marshmallows next to the pond we restored from a construction pit at night. Veterans sit around a fire pit built from reclaimed concrete taken from the failed sales office. They talk, they laugh, they heal, and I sit nearby sometimes, with my daughter, sometimes alone, listening to the sounds of life. This ranch isn't just land and assets, it's my family's heritage, a symbol of resilience and courage. When people like Reynolds try to take it away, they're not just after your property, they're trying to steal your dignity, your history, and your right to choose. So if you're watching this video and facing a similar situation, whether it's a fraudulent HOA, a greedy developer, or any kind of bully, remember this: sometimes the most important boundary to defend isn't the one around your land, but the line defining what you're willing to accept. And for me, a gun range on the border proved to be the perfect boundary. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Your support means everything to us. We pour our heart and soul into creating content that entertains, informs, and inspires, and we're truly grateful to have you as part of our growing community. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel reach more amazing people like you. And most importantly, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update from us. We've got so much more exciting content coming your way, from in-depth stories and dramatic moments to behind-the-scenes insights and special surprises. Whether you're new here or have been with us since the beginning, we appreciate your continued support. Every view, every comment, every subscription fuels our passion to keep going and keep improving. So once again, thank you for watching. Stick around, stay connected, and we promise to keep bringing you the best content we can. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep watching.